Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to False Memory News. As you know, this is the show where we talk about false memories and how exactly are they formed. In tonight's episode, we're going to be focusing on the latest and greatest experiment from some promising UWL students over at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in a cognitive processes class taught by the one and only Bianca Baston, PhD.
Well, let's dive into this promising new research a little bit farther. So, it looks like a brief introduction for these undergrads is the fact that these false memories that we're talking about here, they're created all the time and are used in order to fill in gaps of things we either didn't encode completely or have subconsciously suppressed for various reasons. These false memories are influenced by biology, the environments from which the memories are formed and recalled, and past experiences by the individual. These false memories being discussed can certainly have long-term effects from the way they respond to new stimulus to creating problems for future decision making. The focus of their research is to identify what factors specifically might influence false memory formation. Now, before we get into some new research though, we certainly have to look at the previous literature. So, as discussed earlier, there's a lot of factors that affect false memories. So let's start with the biological side of things. Mons et al. In 2016 did a study that showcased how cortisol, which is formed during highly traumatic events, actually can lead to false memory production. Another biological factor in false memory production that Warren et al. 2014 showed us is that how prefrontal cortex damage is directly related to false memory formation. This is vital to know as it means that these false memories are formed from a higher level functioning rather than a more simple function part of the brain like the hippocampus. Lastly, Lee et al. In 2018 recently did a study that showed us how hormones directly are related to responses to stimuli and false memories. This is important because it solidifies that in fact biological differences in people will lead to different memory formations and contribute to false memory formations. Alright, moving along in the literature review, there's the environment. This is referring to both the environment memories are formed and recalled. A study by Zhang et al. In 2018 showed us that negative stimuli leads to higher false memories. And an example of this was in a image recall test, images with negative connotations led to higher false memories than positive image sets. Mons et al. Also showed us certain environmental factors in their study on cortisol in the sense that stressful environments lead to higher cortisol levels, and as discussed in our biological slide, they have then the higher cortisol levels do lead in fact to false memory formation. And finishing up the environmental slides, we have Outland et al. In 2016. Their study looked at the relationship of false memory recall and suppression. In particular, the fact that if we intentionally suppress information, we effectively can, as a cognitive process, slightly choose what we want to encode and not, depending on the environment we're in. And finally, the literature review was capped off by looking into past experiences by subjects. Peltonen et al. In 2017 study showed us how a high trauma lifestyle by studying Pakistan youth in war zone conditions in their upbringing actually had higher false memory formations, and it was believed this was primarily used as a defense mechanism. Bourne et al. In 2013 also showed how actual past experiences lead to unique neurological pathways being formed in the sense that high trauma memories are encoded and retrieved in different neurological networks than your everyday memory. Finally, Abaid and Kamos 2018 showed us how false memories can impact long-term decisions, ultimately perhaps giving us the most validation of why this research is important, due to the fact that we will in fact use false memories the same as we would a real memory when we make future-orientated decisions.
Thank you, Lucas. For our experiment, we have 240 UWL students in 8 different rooms. In 4 of those rooms, students watched a traumatic video. In the other 4 rooms, students watched a neutral video. For each of the rooms, half of the students were asked to observe the video, and the other half of the students were asked to suppress the video by closing their eyes and trying not to pay attention to the video. So in one room, we had for the traumatic video, we had a balloon popped in the background. For another room, we had someone say something false about the video after it had been played. And then in another room, we had someone pop a balloon behind the students to surprise them, and then also do the false suggestion. And then we had a room where students simply observed or suppressed the video. And then in the neutral video, we did the exact same thing with the balloon popping in one room, false suggestion in another room, balloon popping and false suggestion in one room, and then the final room, just the students observing or suppressing the video. After the presentation, students took a test immediately after these events, and then were asked to come back a week later to retake the same test. Questions that we had in this experiment were: is there a difference between long and short-term memory? Do traumatic events cause false memory? Are flash memories accurate? Do events preceding traumatic events get lost or distorted? Can false suggestion affect long or short-term memory? What happens when we try to suppress a traumatic event? Our independent variable will be the traumatic and the neutral videos. The time in between the test taking and the video being watched, the balloon popping unexpectedly in the background, and also false suggestion. Our dependent variable would be the students' answers on the tests immediately following our presentation of the video, and them coming back a week later. Our dependent variable will be the students' answers to the test both immediately following the videos and a week after following the videos. Our hypothesis is that false recall will be lower in the traumatic video condition overall. When the balloon is popped, false recall during the pop will go down, but events preceding the pop will be less memorable. Those asked to suppress the video and close their eyes will have lowered false recall and remember less important details as much as the main parts of the video. Students will not be affected by the false suggested questions right after the video, but when taking the test a week later, the false suggestion will cause false recall. For our results in the neutral room, false recall was average, but for the traumatic video room, false recall went down. During the balloon pop, for both of the rooms, correct responses went up. Before the balloon pop, for both of the rooms, memory actually went down, unless people were suppressing during the balloon pop. People who generally suppressed the entire movie for each situation had higher correct scores. And then those who were in the rooms where false suggestions were given about the video, the recall immediately after the video, the test scores weren't affected at all for both rooms. But a week later, after being given false suggestion, the students remembered the false suggestion being in the video. Now, to tell us what all this means, here's Lydia.
Thank you so much for that wonderful live update from the scene of the experiment, Fritz. Always appreciate seeing good work out in the field of cognitive psychology. But now, to wrap up this night's tune-in of false memory news, I will be discussing the so what behind this episode. As you can tell from my colleagues, memory recall is affected in certain scenarios. To restate our earlier hypothesis, it was stated that the memory recall process will be affected in a given situation where events are manipulated to affect the brain's ability to process recall. So what the heck does that mean? Who cares? Well, our false memory recall news team cares, and you should too. From Lucas's previously mentioned review of literature, there was a particular study from Dewhurst et al. That shows the impact on future decision-making when exploring simulated events. In this study from Dewhurst, they explored how a simulation of an event can actually activate related items in the brain. Thus, spreading activation comes into play. Spreading activation is the idea that in our brain, when we get a certain input, for example, someone says the word cheese, our brains can think of feet, blue cheese, smelly cheese, Wisconsin, cows, milk, etc. In Dewhurst's study, they explained how this series of related thoughts to the event from spreading activation leads to a higher likelihood of false memory responses of that given simulated event, since the participants have many different links to think of that might relate to the event. The article clearly shows us the negative impacts of potential false memories when asked to recall events, like in our given experiment. When thinking about situations in which memory recall is vital, say in witness testimony, we must be incredibly critical when examining these testimonies. In stressful or traumatic situations, our brains are not equipped to give the proper details because in the time of recall, our brains have too many associative links that could unknowingly lead to misinformation. A limitation we examined for our given study was that some participants might be more easily frightened than others. Some participants might be more capable than others to focus on the task and block out their surroundings, so when they form memories, they are able to be more concrete than those who are unfocused and are easily distracted by traumatic or scary events. Some might also not have many connections to associate to the event, so that when they are asked to recall the information, their brain's only source of information for that stimulus is the event itself, so they produce an accurate recall. A limitation we examined for our given study was that some participants might be more easily frightened than others. Some participants might be more capable than others to focus on the task and block out their surroundings, so when they do form memories, they are able to be more concrete than those who are unable to focus and are easily distracted by traumatic or scary events. Some might also not have many connections to associate to the event, so that when they are asked to recall the information, their brain's only source of information for that stimulus is the event itself, so they produce an accurate recall. Future directions for this research is to see what degree spreading activation's effect has on the brain in other scenarios. If we can find a way to manage and manipulate the spreading activation in our brains, we could potentially find a means to guide memory into producing more information that is stored in our brains that we did not know we were able to access. I would just like to thank everyone for tuning into this week's episode of False Memory News. I would like to thank my co-workers, Lucas and Fritz, for giving us such excellent explanations on all of this research that we have found today. Thank you and have a wonderful night.